All right, morning. So today we are going to have a review for our second module. Okay. So first, I'm going to summarize what we have learned during the second module, and then so we're going to go through the sample test, right? And should you have any question, just type in the chat box, and then so we will go through all the questions, right? So let's start with summarize. So we have covered 3 chapters in this module. So the main theme in this module is measurement. So this is a measurement about our macro economy, right? So we started with national income. So essentially in this chapter, we learn how to measuring the size of the economy so that we can comparing US economy versus Canadian economy. We can comparing Omaha's economy versus Lincoln's economy. We can also compare Omaha's economy in 2020 versus 2019, right? And so in this chapter, we start with GDP, which stands for gross domestic products, right? And then so we use a circular flow diagrams. So we use these circular flow diagrams to study how we can measuring the economy or how we measuring the GDP. So when we discuss the circular flow diagram, so we introduce many concepts. Okay, so here I just list a few. So there are other concepts we have discussed. So this includes government transfer versus government purchase of goods and service. So make sure you understand the difference. And we also look at inventory versus investment spending. Okay, and beside those, we look at financial assets like a bond, stock, and usually they're not considered when we calculate GDP. Okay, and then so we look at import versus export, and then finally, and most importantly, we look at value added. So we also look at intermediate goods. Okay, so those are very important categories for us to understand how we calculate GDP. Okay. And then so we discuss 3 different approaches. So those are approaches we can use to calculate GDP. Okay. So for example, when we look at expenditure approach, we find the equation, which is C plus I plus G plus NX. C stands for consumer expenditure. I stands for investment expenditure. G stands for government purchase goods and service. NX stands for net export. Okay, so you should also know what is the biggest items among these 4 types of expenditures, right? Actually, C is close to 70% for the US economy. Okay, and there are other 2 approaches, product approach and income approach, right? So make sure you understand how we calculate GDP through either of those 3 approaches, right? So we look at a couple of examples in class, but in today's class, so when we look at sample test, I will also discuss some examples, right? And then the last part of this chapter, we look at nominal versus real GDP. Make sure you understand why we make a difference between these 2 concepts, right? And so here the key concept is, so you pick the big base year. Okay, so once you pick a base year, and then you can calculate the real GDP. Okay, and from there we can look at price level. Okay, and so once we define a market basket, and then so you can calculate price index. And then so with the price index, so there are 3 different price index we have discussed. First is consumer price index, and then so we look at producers price index. And then lastly, we can also look at GDP deflator. So that's another price index. And the one thing I want to emphasize here is, so when you look at the growth of real GDP, depending on which year you use as base year, so you're going to have different growth rate. And then to resolve that issue, So we use $10 rule. So basically, so you just pick 2 consecutive years as the base year and then calculate the different growth rate and then take the average, right? So this is the first chapter. Now in the second chapter, we look at growth. Okay? So in this chapter, we start with rule of 70. Right? So that just tells you, so if the country grow by X%, take how many years to double its income, right? And then, so we look at what determines labor productivity. We sort out there are 3 key determinants or key factors: physical capital, human capital, and then technological progress. And based on those observations, we look at aggregated production function. So essentially, just tells you the labor productivity as a function of physical capital, human capital, and the technology. And regarding to production function, so there's a very important and interesting property, which is diminishing return to physical capital. And after that, we look at government policy, how government policy can promote economic growth, and what type of government policy can promote economic growth. Okay, and essentially, so those government policy is so essentially the government policy that promote economic growth largely work through physical capital, human capital, or technology, right? And then, so we also look at convergence and conditional convergence. So in terms of convergence, first is a phenomenon. So meaning, so the country may catch up with each other. And then secondly, so this is because of the diminishing return to physical capital, right? So due to the diminishing return to physical capital, and then we have convergence. But this convergence is not absolute, right? So this, we only observe convergence among countries who have similar institutions, who have similar technology, right? So you should pay attention to that. And then lastly, we look at sustainable economic growth, right? So regarding to sustainability of our economic growth, we must pay attention to 2 things. Number 1, supply of natural resource. And number 2, the impact of our economic growth on environment. Okay, so this is this chapter. And last chapter we have discussed is about labor market. Okay, we start with unemployment. Okay, so we look at the labor market, how we characterize different individuals into the labor market. So whether it is in the labor force or not, right? We also look at labor force participation. Okay? And we also look at the reason why unemployment rate isn't a perfect indicator, right? So because unemployment rate doesn't capture those marginally attached workers, discouraged workers, and underemployed workers. So the unemployment rate also doesn't tell us the quality of job, right? Okay, and to compensate that, so we also look at other indicators so that we have a bigger picture or a more complete picture regarding to the health of the labor market. So this includes labor force participation rate. It includes real wage rate and other things, right? And then, so we look at 3 types of unemployment. This includes frictional, structural, and cyclical. Make sure you understand what they are refers to. And then particularly, so when I give you an example, you can identify which type of unemployment it is, right? All right, and then after that, so we look at price level, and then we learn how to calculate inflation rate. Okay? And we also discuss, so why we want to differentiate between nominal versus real. So this includes nominal interest rate, real interest rate, nominal wage, and a real wage, right? So that just kind of summarize what we have learned in this module, okay? Again, so this is a module about the measurement of our aggregate economy. So includes GDP, includes price, includes labor market, right? So here I just only give you an overview. So there are other topics So we may have discussed, but I haven't put in this short note. Okay, just go to your slides. And then now we go to the practice questions. Okay, so I'm going to go one by one. So I believe everyone has received a copy for this, right? Okay, so to start with the first one. In the above figure, flow B represents, so B, okay, essentially is a connection between households to goods market, right? So actually here, the answer is C, households purchase of goods and service. Okay. Question number 2, use the information in the table above to calculate the value of net export. Okay. So net export equal to export minus import. So we use these two columns. Oh, sorry, these two rows. So hence the net export is 20 minus 10. The answer is B. Three. Normally in the US, the relationship between nominal and real GDP for a given year is, so usually, so price grow over time. So then this means nominal GDP usually is higher than real GDP. Okay, so the answer is C. D. In other words, but you should know, if we look at some particular year, so the base year. So this is the year we pick to calculate real GDP. If we look at a base year, and then that nominal GDP should equal to real GDP. Now, question number 4. In 2014, net export in the United States were, so this is just the basic facts. So usually the US is running a trade deficit, meaning our net export is less than import. Sorry, our export is less than import, and then net export is negative. This is 4. Now 5. Use the information in the table above. Net export, okay, so this is the same question, but with different number, right? And again, so we use these two rows, and that net export is 650 minus 720. So the answer is C. Okay. Question number 6. Marginally attached workers fall into which of the following population categories? Okay. Marginally attached. So they are not in the labor force, right? Because they have not actively looking for a job in the past 4 months, but they have been looking for a job during past year. Okay, so this is question 6. Now, question 7. The unemployment rate is measured as, the answer is C. So essentially, this is a basic concept, right? Now go to question 8. The unemployment rate, let's go one by one, includes person with a job, without a job, who have made effort in the last week to find a job. Okay, so actually this is correct. So now let's see why the other 3 are not correct. B, count people with part-time job who want full-time job as unemployed. Actually, this is underemployed. But nevertheless, this person is employee. C, count discouraged worker. No, so discouraged worker not in labor force. D, include person without a job, whether they are active search for or work or not. No, so if the person is not actively searching, then it's not considered as unemployed. So answer is A. So from this question, you should realize the unemployment rate is not a perfect indicator. Question 9. Suppose the labor force in tiny town is 100 people. If, so now there are 2 blank unit field. If the number is 150, and then the labor force participation rate equals to what, right? Okay, so the answer is D. Okay, so let's just read through. If working age population is 150, the labor force participation rate equal to, now, so labor force, we already knew, is 100. So the population, working age population is 150. Hence, the labor force participation rate is going to be 100 divided by 150. And then multiplied by 100. So this is a normalization. Right. So question number 10. This type of unemployment reflects the normal amount of unemployed workers who possess skills that will enable them to find another job. Okay, so this is about 3 types of unemployment. Okay, so this type is called frictional. Okay, so you had a skill, it just take time for you to find a job. Okay, but however, if someone lost a job because they don't have the skill, and usually that's called structural unemployment. Okay. 11. Unemployment caused by people voluntarily leaving their job is classified as, so this is the same as question 10, actually it's frictional. Now 12, which of the following individuals is the best example of structural unemployment workers? So now let's go one by one. So A, an individual who has laid off from his job because of business cycle. So this is not, this actually is cyclical. B, an individual who quit one job in the hope of finding a better job. This is frictional. C, an automobile worker who has lost her job because of increase in automobile imports and doesn't have the skill currently needed by business. So this is a good example of structural. Okay. And D, a recent college grad who has entered the labor force. So these are usually, this is called frictional. Okay. So the answer is C, but you should understand what does A or B or D stands for, or what type of unemployment it stands for. Okay. 13. Assuming the inflation rate falls from 4 to 2%, this means that, so the answer is B, the price level is increased more slowly. Okay, so this is a typical mistake students make. So the inflation rate falls doesn't mean price level is decreasing. It's still increasing, but increase at a slower pace. Right, so this 13. Now we go to 14. So in the table above, what inflation rate belongs in space C? Okay, so we find the number here. Okay. All right. So in order to find the inflation rate at C, so what do we need to do? Because this is from year 3 to year 4. So we are going to use 120 minus 125 divided by 125. And times 100, that's normalization. Okay. And then the answer is C. So you may want to ask yourself, what is D, what is B and A? Right, let's just, for example, look at D. So if the question asks you what is the number in D, and then D, and then in number D, so what that means is going to D minus 120 divided by 120 times 100. This should equal to 8.3, because D is changing from 120 to D. And then we knew the inflation rate is 8.3. So that's why we have this equation. Okay. Now let's look at 15. If this year price level is 135, and the last year it was 125, the inflation rate is, again, so we use similarly, so like we did in previous questions, 135 minus 125 times 100. Okay, so the answer is B, 80%. So go to the next one, 16. If CPI is 220 and the CPI for the last year was 215, the inflation is, I guess I can skip that one, so because we have to look at 2 inflation question already. Okay, so the answer, I just give you the answer is D. 17. Suppose real GDP for a country is 13 trillion in 2015, 14 in 2016, 15 in 2017, and 16 in 2018. Over this time period, the real GDP growth rate is, okay, so here, this is a very tricky question, right? So the economy grew from 13 to 14 to 15 to 16, right? And usually students answer this question says real GDP growth rate is increasing. Actually, this is not correct. So the question asks you the growth rate, okay? And so the GDP, the real GDP itself, it grew from 13 to 14, 14 to 15, 15 to 16. It is growing, but the growth rate, unfortunately, is decreasing. And how I know it is decreasing? Because from 15 to 16, the growth rate is 1/13. From 16 to 17, the growth rate is 1/14. And from 17 to 18, the growth rate is 1/15. So now you can see the growth rate is declined, right? Because we grow the same amount, but the base becomes larger and larger. Okay, so please pay attention to this type of questions. It asks you the growth rate. Okay. 18. During 2014, the country of economy had a real GDP of 115 billion, and the population was 0.9 billion. In 2013, the real GDP was 105 billion, and the population was 0.85 billion. In 2014, real GDP per person was, okay, and then here, so there's a lot of information trying to distract you. So this one, you only need information here. 115 divided by 0.9. Okay, so the answer is B. '19. In 2010, of the following, which nations has the highest level of real GDP per person? Okay, so this is basic facts. Okay, the answer is B. 20. 3 types of unemployment are, so they're just basic facts about the concept we learned. Okay, the answer is B. Frictional, structural, and cyclical. 21. If we compare the 4 sources of spending in the economy, we see that, okay, so now remember we can look at the GDP but look at expenditure. So the expenditure includes C plus I plus G plus NX. Right? And so again, so this is the basic facts regarding to our macro economy. For the United States, the large, or for most of the country, C is the largest. And for United States, usually NX is negative. Right? So 21, the answer is B. Now, 22. If real GDP per person is growing at 4% per year, approximately how many years will it take to double? So here we need to apply rule of 70. 70 divided by 4. Okay, so then the answer is going to be A. Right? So let's just try a variation of these questions. So if this question asks you, so approximately how many years will it take to increase GDP per person by 8-fold? And then, so how we are going to do? So we need to realize 8-fold, you need double 3 times. And then so the answer is going to be 17.5 times 3. So that's the amount, that's the number of years it will take to make your GDP per person increase 8-fold. Right? So this is 22. Now 23. If a national population growth, then let's go one by one. A, growth in real GDP per person will be greater than the growth of real GDP. No, actually, because of population growth, real GDP per person will be less than growth of real GDP. Okay, so hence answer B is correct. Okay, now let's look at C. There must be an increase in real GDP per person. If the population grows faster than real GDP, and then so you're going to see a decrease in real GDP per person. And a D, there can be no economic growth. That's not correct. Okay, as long as population growth slower than real GDP growth, you're gonna have growth in real GDP per person. And nevertheless, so the real GDP, the growth of real GDP most of the time is independent of population growth. Okay. So 23, the answer is B. Now let's move to the next one. Which of the following statements are correct? A, let's go one by one. One, the average economic growth in real GDP per person in the United States over the last century was 5% per year. No, so it's between 2 and 3% in the United States. Two, the United States has highest economic growth rate of any nation. That's also not correct, right? So you should realize China, India, so their growth rate is much higher than United States, right? So the answer is D. 25. Over the past 4 decades, let's go one by one. A, US real GDP per person has increased. Yes, that's true. B, US real GDP per person has fallen below that of other rich industrial countries. That is not correct. Okay. So if you look at European country, so the US real GDP growth, your GDP per person growth is better than most of the other European countries. C, the growth rate of real GDP per person in the United States has been increasing. Not really, very stable. Okay, it's not correct. D, both A and C are correct. No. Okay, so 25 answer is A. So that's the basic facts regarding to our economy. 26. Which of the following relationship is correct? Let's go one by one. A, growth investment equal to net investment plus depreciation. Okay, so actually this is correct. Okay, so even we haven't discussed in detail in class yet, but we loosely talk about that. So for example, so the inventory investment is considered as investment considered as investment. Okay, what is depreciation? So depreciation is a worn out of your physical capital. Okay. All right, so now I go to 27. The difference between gross investment and net investment is, so 27 is corresponds to 26, depreciation. So depreciation is a positive number. Right? So again, so what is depreciation? So you own a house, and so over time, your house is going to turn down, right? So that's going to lose some value. And then, so this loss of value, we call it depreciation. Okay. Another example, so you have your computer, right? So your computer usually lasts for 3 to 5 years. And then, so during this time period, when you're using a computer every year, you're going to lose some value. So that's called depreciation. Okay. So 28, according to the BEA. So BEA here stands for Bureau of Economic Analysis. In this, so actually this is the government agency who is responsible for calculating our GDP. According to BEA, in the second quarter of 2012, purchase of new residential structures rose by 8.9%. Using the expenditure approach, this change increases. Okay, so this is an interesting question. Okay. So the residential structure is new. This must include as GDP. But this residential structure, so this is called durable goods, and usually this is characterized as investment. So hence the answer is B. So this is going to increase in growth, private domestic investment. Okay, so this is not a consumer expenditure. Okay, so this is investment. This is 28. Now let's look at 29. Personal consumption expenditure include all of the following except. So I go one by one. A, consumer non-durable goods. So what is considered as non-durable goods? Like we consume on a daily basis. It doesn't last for long, right? So this is actually, so this is considered as consumer expenditure. B, consumer service. What is consumer service? Like say for example, so your cell phone subscription, your Amazon Prime, or even so you go to a gym. So those consumer service. Yes, it is considered as consumer spending. C, new house. So new house is not considered as expenditure because so this is an investment like we just discussed in previous questions. And D, consumer durable goods. Okay, so durable goods is consumer expenditure, right? What is durable goods? Let's say, for example, the washing machine your parents purchased, okay, or your car you purchased, right? So the answer for 29 is C. New housing is not included as consumer expenditure. Okay. 30. A US firm buys a new industrial sewing machine from a company located in France. Which of the following is true? 1. US net export decrease. Yes, actually this is true because the American purchase goods from foreigners. That's net export equal to export minus import. Now the import increase, and then so this number is going to decline. And 2, US investment increase. This is also correct, right? Why? Because this is a sewer machine, industrial sewer machine. So this is considered as physical capital and is characterized as investment. Okay? So the answer is C. Now 31. From 1980 to 2000, the employment to population ratio, and another one is from 2000 to 2014, the ratio generally. Okay, so the answer for here, so I can tell is increasing and decreasing. Okay, so if you can remember these, don't worry. So this probably is not going to show up in the exam, but so it's good to know. So this is the basic facts regarding to our economy. Okay, so these are good facts to know. Okay, 32. The unemployment rate is measured as. So the answer is A. The percentage of people in the labor force who are unemployed. Well, let's just go back to 31. So there's another interesting fact you should know. Okay, so we already discussed in class. So we look at the labor force participation rate among female workers and among the so we look at two labor force participation rate. One is among female worker. The other is age under 25. What we notice is since World War II, the female labor force participation rate gradually increased over time. On the other hand, for people under age 25, the labor force participation rate gradually declined. Okay, in class, I'll give you two possible answers for each of these change in labor force participation, right? Regarding to females' labor force participation rate decline, the possible explanation is because of availability of those home technology. So that's kind of free the females from housekeeping, also increase their opportunity of staying at home. So that explains why their labor force participation rate went down. Now, regarding to workers under age of 25, so because of skill or because of better education brings higher wage. So that is going to raise their opportunity cost of not attending higher education or not getting better education. Hence, the labor force participation rate among workers under age 25 declined. Okay, so this is 31. Now we move to 33. The employment to population ratio. So the answer is D. Okay. All right, so now we look at 34. And observers of the economy noticed that over the past 12 months, the employment rate has fallen from 7% to 6.5%. During the same time, the rate of growth in real GDP has been positive. From this information, we might conclude, okay, so look at here. So what happened? So first, we notice unemployment rate decline. And at the same time, the economy is growing, right? So the positive growth. Right? So now what this information tells us? So based on the discussion of business cycle, and we should notice, so the economy is in expansion, right? So B is correct. So other information you should know is, so the economy is in expansion. Sooner or later, so the peak in the business cycle will be reached. Okay, not a trough. What is a trough? The trough just says, okay, so you are in a recession. Okay, and eventually, so we are going to see some light at the end of the tunnel. So trough is what? It's the end of the recession. Now we are in the expansion. So eventually we are going to see the peak of the expansion. Right? So this is 34. So the answer is B, and here I just explain to you why C is not correct. To make C correct, we should say a peak in the business cycle will soon be reached. Okay. 35. In September 2012, the US unemployment rate was 7.8%, while the natural unemployment rate was 6%. Okay, so first of all, the difference between natural rate and actual unemployment rate is called cyclical. And secondly, so here this just means so we run below our capacity. Okay, and then so we are going to have a positive negative output gap. So by the way, what is output gap? Is what you can produce. So this is what you can produce actually versus what you can produce potentially. But what you can produce potentially is what you can produce with natural unemployment rate. Okay. And the other things I probably just forgot to discuss in class. So full employment actually means we have an unemployment rate that equals to natural unemployment rate, not 0%, but actually is natural unemployment rate. So that's when we are in full employment. Okay, so if you have an unemployment rate higher than natural unemployment rate, meaning so you have extra worker, not employee compared to natural unemployment. Hence, you're going to produce less than you can potentially produce. On the other hand, if the unemployment rate is below your natural unemployment rate, and then so you have less people unemployed compared to your potential. Hence, you produce more than you can potentially produce. You're going to have a positive output gap. So, for example, before COVID-19, the US unemployment rate was 4%. And given the natural unemployment rate was 6%, meaning before COVID-19, at the end of 2019, the US economy had a positive output gap, right? So this is 35. Now 36, when real GDP is, and then unemployment rate is, okay? So so let's just ignore those options. So there are two ways to fill this plan. If real GDP is greater than potential GDP, and then unemployment rate is less than natural unemployment rate. If real GDP is less than potential GDP, then unemployment rate is greater than natural unemployment. Okay, so the answer is C. Okay. Okay, so here the potential GDP is what we produce when unemployment rate is at natural unemployment rate. Okay. 37. The cost of inflation to society includes. The answer is C. It includes the opportunity cost of resource used by people to protect themselves against inflation. How they can protect themselves against inflation? So they just use their cash they received to buy goods and services. 2, the diversion of productive resource to focus the inflation, right? Because we need to find out what's going to be the inflation in the next period so that we can take the appropriate action to protect our financial wealth. Okay, this is 37. 38. If last year's price level was 100, and then this year's price level is 114, over the year, the inflation rate has been, okay, so the answer is, so B, this is how we calculate. 114 minus 100 divided by 100 times 100. Okay, so this is percentage change in price level. 39. Last year's price level was 120, And since then, there has been 5% inflation. So this year, the price level is, so we can use the similar formula to find out. Let's say this year's price level, use X to denote this year's price level. And then, so based on the information, we are going to have X minus 120 divided by 120 times 100. This must equal to 5, right? So this is change in price level, and then so we normalize. Okay, and then so we knew this is going to be 5%. So based on this equation, so we knew, so the inflation rate is 126. Sorry, the price level is 126. Okay, so now I have finished the discussion for all of the practice questions. Okay, so just please, based on this sample test, and go through the material we have discussed. All right, so we have some time left. So we have skipped a few videos. Okay, so there's one important video I want you to watch. So now let me just switch to my other computers to show you that video. Okay, just bear me with a second. In the meantime, if you have any questions, just send me a message, or you can just ask me right away. Let me just pull out that videos for you to watch.